Africa's agricultural sector is currently affected by a host of factors. Funding, inadequate technological input, and the lack of political will by most governments have turned Africa into a continent that begs for food and relies on imports. Blessed with at least 60% of the world's arable lands, there's a lot more Africa can achieve to be self-sustained in terms of feeding, as a food crisis rocks the continent and the claws of climate change are causing deep sores. There's never been a time when developmental thinking and direction are needed. Africans can sustain Africa, but they need help. How can these be done? How can the continent be the food bowl of the world and not present bowls to beg the world for food? Now, these solutions and more will be unpacked on The Square today. Welcome, I'm Sulaiman. Well, despite having some of the best lands for agriculture in the world, farming in Africa has been mainly subsistence. The commercial potential of agriculture in the world is a constant reminder to Africa that a lot still needs to be done. Now, the Russia-Ukraine war has tested the continent's resolve, as one of its greatest exports, wheat, was held back as a result of the war. Other food items have also been affected by this war. So Africans have had to queue to feed and receive food in bowls. Sometimes they plant seeds and they never grow as a result of climate change. Other times it's because of unwanted insects. Africa's 1.3 billion people depend on the rest of the world for the majority of its food, yet there are lands waiting to be cultivated for planting. The question has been the potential for Africa to feed itself. Can Africa feed itself? The question was answered by President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Adeshina, when he said, "Food aid cannot feed Africa. Africa does not need bowls in hand. Africa needs seeds in the ground and mechanical harvesters to harvest bountiful food produced locally." Now, Africa will feed itself with pride, for there is no dignity in begging for food. End of quote. Now, looking at that from additional, perhaps to also answer this important question on The Square today, I have Azubike Nwokoye, who is a Food and Agriculture Program Coordinator, ActionAid Nigeria, and of course, Emmanuel, who is a doctoral researcher at University of Heidelberg in Germany. Gentlemen, good to see you. And, let's even start by asking, that in Africa, a lot of people ask, there's this form of greeting by asking, have you eaten today? So perhaps I feel like asking, let's start by asking, have we eaten today, gentlemen?
Yeah, thank you for having us. And for us here in Nigeria, due to the work we do, when you say, have you eaten today, we will say, thank a farmer.
I like that. All right, okay, so now, as we begin, let's start with you. Let me start with the FDB's president's statement. It looks like a question, but it is deeper than deep. Can Africa feed itself?
We can actually feed ourselves. You've mentioned the 60% arable land. We can do it. And the funny part of it is that most of the food imports are commodities that we can also grow competitively in Africa. So we can do it. All we need is political will and the right funding at the right time.
Okay, let's bring you, Emmanuel. These are times that the continent truly should have actually been able to, leapfrog into, the big business of agriculture, not only feeding the continent, but again, also coming in aid of other parts of the world. But again, let's come back to the continent. How can Africa feed itself to start with?
Thank you very much, Sulaiman, and I'm happy to be here on the show, Village Square. Building on what my colleague Azubike has said, the arable land we're talking about is something that is so vast, and it is the primary resource that we have. And we have this not just in a rich supply, but also in some very highly favorable conditions. I mean, weather conditions. And now talking about arable land ranging from about 500 million to 800 million hectares, and having also people, more than 40 million unemployed people around Africa. I mean, put those two core resources together, land and then labor. Then you find that half of the problem is solved. What we now need would be the enabling environment, which will provide the necessary inputs, where land that will serve as an intermediary between land and labor. The land is there, the people are there. What we need is the go-between. We need viable seeds, we need supportive mechanisms, we need subsidized provision of fertilizers, flooding, and the places where agriculture is currently going on to begin to see these things become a reality. But you see, the problem again may not even be about people and land. Another dimension to it is the issue of productivity. Now, there could be, a lot of people currently involved in agriculture, but comparatively, the productivity is also low because we're still stuck with subsistence farming. We're stuck with crude implements, and this would limit productivity. So what people are saying, maybe we need more land, but maybe we don't need more land. Maybe we just need, the commitment and the right tools to inject into the system and really provide us with what we need. I think I want to start on this note, and we can push the discussion further.
Certainly, we're pushing it further because I've been following conversations in Ghana, in Accra, Ghana, gentlemen, where the AFDB is having the meeting, and it was just one man, Akinwumi Adesina, who said, against the backdrop of what everyone is thinking, that we can do it. And he went further by stretching it by talking about what he did in 2012 in Nigeria as minister. Keep in mind, he's just as good as both of you, someone who is in the agric business for many years. And he said, look, when Nigeria witnessed flooding in 2012, everyone thought we were going to go into farming. But he came back in it with technology, and Nigeria was able to get enough food to the extent that prices of food crashed. So help us here, Azubike. There are things that needs, to be done. Perhaps that's not being done for the continent to be self-sufficient in agriculture.
Okay. The African countries need to invest a lot in irrigation farming. We can no longer farm waiting on the rains. We need to also farm throughout the year, because what is happening is that it is not that farmers have not increased their production, but what is also happening is that our population growth is growing faster than our agricultural production is growing also. Then we still have the challenge of the low yield, challenges around access to extension services and so on. So then the issue of post-harvest losses, I will just give you the figure for Nigeria. The figure for Nigeria alone for post-harvest losses is estimated that as a country we lose about 3.5 trillion naira annually from post-harvest losses alone. So if we can plug post-harvest losses by investing in cottage industries, then it means that we can save a lot of resources, and that can also reduce our imports. In terms of increasing productivity also, From the recent data that we collected, demonstration plots across the country is around 5 point something percent, meaning that it's very low. Farmers field schools is not up to 20%. So investment in extension services need to happen. So because the truth is even if you give farmers improved varieties and you don't support them with the knowledge on proper agronomic practices that will make you have the expected yield of that particular improved variety, then you have wasted resources in providing that. Then we need to also be able to do the right investments at the right time. Most African countries, in terms of the agriculture budget, they are doing below 10%. We recently, the African Union recently launched the third biannual review report, which shows that only one country in Africa is on track, and that is only Rwanda. Yes, others are progressing, but for a continent, for only one country to be on track on the 7 Malabo commitments, it means that we need to do a lot.
Well, you've actually also listed a lot here because, again, I'll need to also go back to 2012 because it's something that a lot of us witnessed. And what Nigeria did at that point in time with Akinwumi Adesina was to go into what they call dry season farming. That was novel. And you said something about irrigation, Azubike. Help us here, Emmanuel, because let's see if we can expatiate on some of the key things he's talked about. Some would say, I'm happy you're in Europe. Some would say back in the day, now, wow, it is mango season. And people say, wait a minute, it is only back home here or in Africa you talk about seasonal food. You can have these, crop or these products, this produce, year in, year out, off season, on season. So help us here. What are our farmers not doing business-wise to the extent that they still think that some of these crops are seasonal crops?
Well, you have already struck the metal on the gong properly by talking about the issue of irrigation. And irrigation is not just a kind of supplementary measure to meet the needs of deficient precipitation. I mean, deficiency in rainfall. We're diverting gradually into the impact of climate change as we speak on this issue, because with climate change, we have the onset of rainfall sometimes being uncertain, and issues such as that, there could be unintended or unplanned drought coming up. And so irrigation could quickly serve as irrigation as a supplementary scheme to provide this shortage of required water for the crops to grow or to get matured or whatever stage the crop is. But also irrigation is a whole lot of project. It's like a standalone project on its own, where we can facilitate the year-round system of cropping, especially given the adequate soil conditions and other conditions. Irrigation, especially in areas that are close to riversides and streams and all of that flow year-round, water bodies, can really help farmers to provide these supplementary water needs, either for precipitation shortages or where there is the absence of rainfall, or even to grow crops all year round. So it's something that is a global best practice to engage in irrigation, not just as a kind of, how do I put it, a quick solution to drought or to water shortage, but also to consistently and continuously grow crops. I had a short stint in northern Ethiopia, and this is almost a dry land, and yet they produce all manner of foods fruits, and vegetables for use and consumption even in the region. And so irrigation is what drives such year-round agriculture in such places. And this is what all of Africa must begin to think about, how to channel, water streams where this is allowed and where there is an agreement, from places that are upstream even to places that are downstream, so that a place that naturally do not have a water body can have a flow of some water to fund their irrigation regime for adequate water supply. And also, I want to pick also on the issue of extension services that my colleague has already talked about. And this issue of extension services is not just the conventional so-so extension services. It has to be revolutionary. It has to be something that is built and is based on 21st century practices, digital technologies and techniques, and introducing the rural farmers in a simplified way, how these improved seeds can give them more yields than the seeds they have been keeping and preserving, from year to year to year. I think I want to stop here for us to reflect on this.
Yeah, I'll stay with you before we come back to Azubike, Emmanuel, and it has to do with some of the, listening to you, and now you've dropped it off on the extension, services. Off the top of my head, I recall back in the day, in most high schools across Nigeria and in other parts of Africa, we had agricultural sciences, and quite a number of these teachers were actually experts, and now it would seem as if they have just gone under. Now, where is the place of education? Now we're talking about extension services. Where's the place of education in all of this? You are a researcher. Quite a lot needs to be done in that regard back home in Nigeria and other parts of the continent. So help us make sense of the place where we stand in terms of having experts that will, train the extension service experts who would in turn go to the nooks and crannies of the continent to also help enlighten our farmers.
Thank you very much. You're opening up a broader perspective into this discussion by bringing in the education sector. And I would say that education is not taken seriously in Nigeria. And this is an indictment on the government because there are willing people. There are people who are willing to sacrifice and remain in the system and see that the younger generation and even the current generation are molded into competitive, standard-based exposures, and who have proven themselves to compete globally. Of course, I'm a product of the Nigerian education system myself, and I only relocated just recently for my doctoral research here, and I'm living in Nigeria, and of course I still have to come back to Nigeria and continue my teaching work. But you see, where lecturers are disgruntled and where there is this consistent interruption of the education system, it makes a whole mess of the education system, where we now cramp up the curriculum because of consistent and persistent strikes. Of course, agricultural extension experts are not made in the secondary schools, they are made in the universities, and that is why I'm talking in this wise, in reference to the persistent and the perennial industrial actions that the government has forced the Academic Staff Union of Universities to embark, almost an annual tradition. And so these extension workers, I do not know, I cannot say how much of expertise they must have even acquired, going by all that is going on in the education system. And where by self-effort, some have distinguished themselves, you find that very soon they are attracted to somewhere else where their skills are appreciated and valued, and then there is a drain. And those who have, invested a lot to train and bring these experts up eventually we lose them to, better societies that recognize every little talent and every little effort and every little skill. So now education has to be given the required priority, starting from the budgetary allocation. The peanuts that is allocated to education annually in the budget is something that has to be reversed. And also the teachers themselves, there is a high level of willingness and commitment generally among teachers. Of course, I'm not saying this is 100%, but I'm sure that if the environment is enabled for these teachers in higher institutions to do their job properly, then I'm sure even the quality of those who will be brought up would also increase. And when conditions of services are improved also for those in the agricultural sector, I cannot remember the last time there was an invitation for maybe my friend and colleague from ActionAid who has this live data from the field can also inform us. The last time there's a call for vacancy of agricultural extension workers. And then that becomes the measure for you to look at where are the agricultural extension graduates going to? Where are the crop breeding graduates going to? Where are the animal breeders going to? And all those very, very essential courses, including biotechnology in our universities, where are the graduates going to? And so you discover that everybody wants to read medicine, everybody wants to read, some courses that gives them a sense of self-reliance because they've not seen anybody in their entire community, in their entire local government, in their entire state, amounts to anything from reading agriculture. Sometimes, because there are people who also take what they have done seriously and, major on the entrepreneurship part. So I think it's a whole lot of web of interconnected issues that will be touched on if we begin to delve into the effect or the impact of education on the production of high-level agricultural extension experts and how these graduates are integrated into the system and all of this.
Let me jump in here, Emmanuel. Thank you again for your time because I deliberately wanted you to weigh in on this before we come back to Azubike because it will seem as if, because I am quite sure Azubike should be able to let us in on what, number one, first let us in what ActionAid is doing because we understand ActionAid is doing quite a lot. And for you to also be in Nigeria's southeast, at the moment helping in that regard, there should be a lot to share with. It's just, I go back again, listening to Akim Additional yesterday, I said to myself, if he wasn't someone practicing in that regard, he wouldn't have been able to say anything on that. So the potential, they say, is massive, what we're discussing now in cash and food crops. So Azubike, help us here. How is the reach in terms of imparting knowledge to the small-time and big-time farmers to the extent that it will look attractive to those people who are coming out of the university where Emmanuel is, to join you in the field to help him ensure that the continent doesn't go into famine?
Yeah, like what Dr. Emmanuel said, the issues are interconnected. Interconnected in the sense that apart from the issues of lack of funding, equipping, and so on for the education sector, the number of extension officers currently in Nigeria agriculture sector is very low. At times, you have in some places, you see one extension agents to 5,000 or 10,000 family farms. And unfortunately, despite the fact that they are few in number, most times through the budgeting process, they are not provided with operational costs, like transport allowance to go to the communities because extensions are not done in the offices, motorcycles, vehicles, training and retraining, and so on. And we normally tell the Nigerian government that if you don't equip extension agents and you don't train and retrain them and support them to do their work, And even if you owe them for some months and later pay them, means that you've wasted our commonwealth by paying people who did not do any work. So we are not getting value for money in the first instance. So actually, one of the things as ActionAid Nigeria we are doing in that regard is in the states we are working in and in certain programs, we actually work with the extension agents, provide them what the tools they don't have, so that they are able to provide agroecological trainings to farmers and also support them. And we also organize quarterly meetings between the farmers in communities and the extension agents. So we are trying to facilitate and bridge the gap where government funding is not available. While we also take steps to do, one of the things we are doing is scaling up public investment in agriculture, where we engage with the government through the budget process, do budget analysis and so on, to point out specific areas where funding is needed for quick wins, and where the investment is needed mostly. And the budget process in Nigeria is also challenged with lack of timely funding, because even despite the low funding that is being experienced, most times the capital does not do up to 50% at the end of the fiscal year. So we are pushing to ensure that status quo changes. Like what the president of the African Development Bank is talking about, it is not rocket science. It's simply putting investment. For instance, the Nigerian government needs to bring back the Growth Enhancement Support Scheme, which was able to provide improved seeds, fertilizer, and other support to farmers, and pesticides and so on, for farmers to be able to increase their food production. Though during that implementation, those years, it came with a lot of challenges initially, but there was also improvement, because as ActionAid, we did a community scorecard on access to identify the challenges, and those challenges were taken up by the government then to try to sort it out. So in a nutshell, all these things are interrelated. For instance, African governments, many of them, their agriculture budget, the investment is below 10%, and even annually. So they are not meeting the Maputo Malabo commitment of at least 10% of annual budget to the agriculture sector, so that each country can achieve 6% growth. I mentioned the biannual review that was recently launched, the third one that was recently launched in February by the African Union Heads of State meeting, and there were specific area of commitments that African governments have been measured against. Commitment areas like recommitment to the principles and values of the CADI process, enhancing investment finance in agriculture, ending hunger by 2025, halving poverty through agriculture by 2025, boosting intra-African trade in agricultural commodities and services, enhancing resilience in climate variability, and enhancing mutual accountability for action and results. And unfortunately, it's only Rwanda that is on track in terms of generally based on different indicators in this area. So it means that African government we need to get our act together. And also, if you look at the conflict part of issues with insecurity, banditry, terrorism, and so on, it is also bearing its own different brunt in terms of the fact that in some areas, farmers are at risk, food production is at risk, they can't go to farm, they are being kidnapped and so on. Not only in Nigeria, in some certain countries. And you see that there are many countries within Africa now that is facing food and nutrition security shocks already. And meaning that more aid is needed within this period also. But the truth is this, if only government can do the right thing, the agriculture sector can actually provide the number of jobs that can also reduce these negative vices. Let me
Well,
stop here.
no doubt. We'll take a break because I'm happy that you've talked about the Maputo Convention on Agriculture, which was actually resolved by all African leaders in 2003. 10% hasn't actually been met by any of these African countries. And you've also gone into another issue, which is talking about security is very key here. In 2020, in Nigeria alone, some farmers in their numbers were slaughtered in Nigeria's northeast, killed. And of course, that threat is still very much evident there. Horn of Africa, in the Sahel, and of course in Nigeria. So we'll come back and speak more about what the AFDB is pumping into the agriculture sector to boost food production up to about $12 billion. That's when we return. Join us again. Well, if you just joined us, we welcome you watching Village Square Africa here on News Central Television, broadcasting live to 54 African countries and beyond. We're looking at agriculture and how the continent Africa can actually feed itself. Now, old and modern methods have proven important in agriculture production, and the need to make both work can't be underestimated. In Shasha, Goma, north of Kogi region of the Democratic Republic of also the Congo, farmers use human urine as insect repellents. Now, the urine is stored for a month and is sprayed on the field. The ability to kill insects and send them away has helped farmers improve their harvest in that region. Now, this kind of local practice is boosting the yields of a people, and it's high time African farmers combined new methods and old practices. Now, with fertilizer prices increasing by at least 300%, African governments must encourage African investors to look inwards to promote African agricultural sector and food production. Still very much with me on the square is Azubike and Nwokoye and Emmanuel. Gentlemen, thanks for your time. We're coasting home quickly here before that break. So we're going to talk about what the AFDB is pumping in. Let's start with you, Emmanuel. The AFDB said it is actually pumping $1.5 billion into the agriculture sector to boost production up to $12 billion in 2 years. So help me, do you find such plans too ambitious?
Well, there is no question of being too ambitious with such a great plan. But you see, my issues with planning sometimes in our climb are things that creep in between planning and implementation that thwarts the goals of the plan. Now, bringing 1.5 billion emergency food production plan is such a great idea. And the long-term plan from what the president of the AFDB is talking about is to win Africa, separate Africa from importing basic grains like wheat, maize, rice, and soybean, from from abroad, which we see the war in Europe taking its toll on such an, staple food in most of Africa. And here, this is not an over-ambitious plan, but I would say is what I would say is that if we talk about 1.5 billion being released, then this 1.5 billion should go to the farmers, should go directly to the farmers. Of course, I know the AFDB has no jurisdiction in delivering the money in hand to the farmer or the seeds in the farmer, but when this to the farmer, but when these donations come to the country, how do they trickle down to the grassroots? This becomes the question that begs for answer. I was looking at a picture on social media, and I saw somebody hawking the bags that are labeled with UNICEF logo that has been sent to distribute, for distribution to school children. And so if this kind of a thing is going on, it means that when such amounts of money, huge amounts of money is released into the African economy and is not properly monitored to ensure that it trickles down to those who should really receive this amounts of funding support, then we'll see that the entire thing will be like investing in a bag of holes, because as soon as politicians are able to hijack this amount of money, they just make a ceremony and sprinkle some amounts on a few persons with whom they can have some camera shows, and they say this money has been distributed. But so what I'm trying to boil down is the effective utilization and then proper distribution of these monies that have been approved, because like my friend talked about, Azubike mentioned that this is commonwealth. And so this must be properly used for what it has been designated for. It's not a tall dream to say that we can achieve, this billion amount of food in 2 years, because when funds are pumped in, these funds come also in terms of seedling support and then fertilizer support and all kinds of inputs. The land is already there, and these inputs all harnessed together by labor, by the laborers, by the farmers, will definitely yield a bountiful harvest. So it's not a tall dream at all, if you want me to answer that in a single sentence, but I think I've been able to also throw more light on where leakages can make this dream to fail and look like a bogus dream if unchecked.
Yeah, because the conditionality clause you've just thrown in there is very key. Now we're talking about corruption, and that's just the fear and the worry. Perhaps, Azubike, how can these, I talked about techniques, it looks crude, but somehow some do work for these farmers, side by side with, the kind of knowledge that you and your team and other extension workers will share with them. So how can some of these modern methods be made to spread, for others to have a feel of them, so that we can all see the beauty and ease in agriculture?
Okay, just to say that Africa's food production is also highly chemicalized. Chemicalized, if I use that word, means that intensification of agriculture through too much chemical. And it also has its negative impact on the soil. It contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. It contributes to climate change. Agriculture is one of the highest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And we need to also produce sustainably in the sense that we need to do a lot of production in terms of agroecology and agroforestry. Now, there are many natural ways that can be combined with also a little bit of chemical, and from time to time we can now transition out of this chemically based agriculture to agroecology. Yes, even neem leaves. There are other ways to even produce fertilizer. For instance, neem leaves can also be used for fertilizer and pest control also. And just to also say that even when you mention the cost of fertilizer also, farmers can do compost. Organic fertilizer should be part of the fertilizer that will be supplied to support farmers also, so that we also try to produce our food sustainably. There are other local ways that have been shown to be sustainable that will also reduce the cost of chemical and external inputs so that people can produce sustainably also. So we can go that route, and we can do that. Then when it comes to also relating it to the amount that is planned to be invested, I think the African Development Bank needs to be strategic and not just throw money at government so that those money don't get to individual pockets or to the pockets of the big farmers who really don't need this support because they don't even produce for local consumption also. Because, for instance, in Nigeria, across board, the recent data we collected is showing that access to agricultural credit for smallholder women farmers is only 23% across Nigeria, and access to agricultural insurance services in order to reduce risk or help farmers bounce back is only about 5%. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is that there are key areas that this investment needs to go into. At times, it is not even about production. It might be around the issues of even processing or preservation in order to reduce post-harvest losses. Because at times in programming, government makes mistake of production, gives seed, everybody produces, and there's no guaranteed minimum price. Then we suffer post-harvest losses. There are no enough processing facility. Then even the issue of the rural infrastructure, the roads, the electricity, and so on, they are all needed and they need to all be combined to solve our issues of low productivity and waste in terms of the agriculture sector. So the intervention needs to be properly targeted through proper farmer associations also. The government, I have seen a situation, even in Nigeria, where government really, if they mean business, they will actually put their act together and do the right thing. There are different projects that I have also seen government in Nigeria implementing, and they had made sure that the project is well targeted and implemented well. So equipment like threshers and so on, and even converting farm waste to fertilizer. Those are the kind of interventions they need to go into. Labor-saving technology and also women-tailored labor-saving technology. In extension, they need to invest more in e-extension also, and also increase the number of extension agents across board, not just only in Nigeria, but across Africa.
Let me jump in here. Apologies for butting in. Let me jump in here, and I'm trying to see how we can now be winding down, and how we can I know we definitely will be having this conversation again. One is certainly not enough, but I'm thinking, if I were a farmer, I would be thinking of how I can get help in terms of better seedlings, which we also highlighted on the program, better breeds of animals. No one wants to keep any animal that will take almost forever to give you what you want. And if we're talking about pushing this further, help us here, Emmanuel. how can farmers get that kind of help to get in better seeds, better yields, better breeds?
Thank you very much. I really acknowledge what ActionAid and other NGOs and government organizations are doing in boosting agriculture. It's quite interesting to hear what is going on in the field. And I would want to harp on a single point here on how we can really have the common farmers to get access to better breed of seeds and animals for their breeding, for higher productivity and higher yield. Now, this is where the town meets gown initiative is very important. Most times there are a lot of research that goes on in our higher institutions of learning and research centers littered across Africa. But there is actually there is a mismatch between the outputs of some of these researches with integration into policy and sending it down on the local common person it has the effect on. And this takes me back to the issue of education. If education is funded as it should be, I must acknowledge what TED Fund is doing. There is now an annual TED Fund, National Research Fund, where senior researchers compete for very vital research, funding for very vital research annually, and government sets aside a lot of money for this for some years now. Now, these researches that are conducted, especially within the agricultural sector, there are a lot of crop breeders, there are a lot of animal breeders who are doing an amazing work and who are even showcasing some of these, winning awards in their scientific outputs. But this has not translated to improved mechanism, techniques, practices on our agricultural sector. We need to begin to rethink the impacts of research on the society. This disconnect has been lingering enough. And so I think this is a call that we must begin to take our researchers seriously and pay attention to the output of their research, and then see how to integrate this into policy and also enable them to communicate the findings of their research, not just on multiple publications that people struggle to have to get promoted, but on how that research impacts the common man for whom you have made that research, conducted that research. So this is the point I want to make here. There's a lot of knowledge, I mean, in science by Africans, for Africa, using Africa as study areas, using demonstration sites, using different areas of study within the continent. But then how it gets back to these farmers who should constitute this citizen science is lacking. And this is also a call that this town meet gown approach, if properly instituted, is going to also create an inflow of indigenous knowledge. You were talking about the use of urine for pesticides and all that. This can become scientifically proven. I do not know if there is a research already conducted on this. I cannot say. But I mean, if there was none and researchers have this interface with farmers and they come to discover, they use urine, they soaked it for 10 days, and they begin to analyze it scientifically. Okay, this bacteria grows, or this other organism grows. We can replicate this in the lab, and then make healthier chemicals, not to chemicalize agriculture like Azubike said, but also to find friendly, environmentally friendly approaches from indigenous knowledge, otherwise called citizen science. So I think this is what I want to say on this town meets gown. This must begin to happen.
And we can't close the show without, touching on security. Azubike, help us here. You're in the field. You're also in talks with some of these, experts in the farms. How is security affecting food production in Nigeria?
Yeah, it's actually very high in terms of the situation because many communities, especially communities that are riddled with banditry, many of them don't go to farms anymore. It is a very big challenge. So you find out that it is not just only northeast alone now, but northwest, and also, in fact, all over the country in different places, depending on the context. In some areas there are also farmer header clashes also. So the government needs to step up their game in terms of the agro rangers, which they had formed through the Civil Defense Corps. Properly fund them, increase their number to see how they can also protect farmers and make the farms secure, because that is also affecting farm output. Because if farmers can't go to their farm, then they cannot really do anything about it. Though in some communities they are also starting backyard gardens also to make up for the shortage. But in terms of affecting food production, it is really affecting food production. You would have heard about 2 or 3 weeks ago about some numbers of farmers were kidnapped in a community in Kaduna State also. So it's really a big challenge in terms of farming. Security needs to be looked into also. So just to drive us back to the issue of the improved varieties, early maturing animals, and so on. So it is the same thing we talked about in terms of also the challenges with extension services. If proper funding is not put into extension services, all the research outputs, the improved varieties and so on might end up on the shelf, because it is extension services that actually interface with farmers and support in helping them have access to improve varieties, improve seeds, improve early maturing animals and so on. And if you provide that to farmers without providing them the knowledge to even nurture it properly or do the best agronomic practices, then productivity will still remain low. So the interconnectedness is what we need to all sort out together.
I'm afraid we're almost out of time here. But again, as I did say, we'll keep the conversation going. Tomorrow is Africa Day, and no doubt we'll be also looking at this. Gentlemen, thank you for being such nice company. Azubike, Nwokoye, and Emmanuel Aledeh. We should be having you back on the score again. Many thanks, Africa, for watching. I'm Sulaiman. See you again.